Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. I'm here with Knitting Natter to help you knit with ease, confidence and joy and repeat your knitting. I'm going to talk today about why I love repeats in knitting, because repeats in knitting are so fundamental. We're going to talk big, we're going to talk small, we're going to talk all sorts of things about repeating in knitting. It sounds kind of boring, but it is the survival instincts in humanity, isn't it? It's familiarity, because familiarity comes from family, and family is a close-knit group of people, and so familiarity can actually be really helpful. It can be healing, it can be comforting, and that's what we want from our knitting. We want cosy, we want hygge. So it's a warming feeling, it's a feeling of recognition, of understanding, of knowing, of being able to relax and feel calm. One of the biggest things about knitting repeats is repeating a particular item, a particular pattern. I love picking up a knitting pattern. I've knitted many times before. Like, I will pull out baby hat patterns. I have those hat patterns. I've shown you them, my own designs as well. But I have baby patterns. I have books of baby patterns. Do go and look. I will drop it below. The knitting book and knitting pattern videos, which share with you the favourite books I have about my knitting, because they have the patterns in them that I will go back to again and again. There will come a time when the next generation in my family is very likely to start having children. And I will pull out those patterns that I knitted for them, and their children will have the same items. It will just be with a modern yarn, with a modern colour. You can knit something in a weekend, and I just pull out a pattern. I just pull out something and I say, okay, I'll knit a baby beanie. I'm going to need one soon. I'll just knit a baby beanie. I'll knit a pair of fingerless mitts, and it might take me 3 or 4 days. And just, yeah, I feel like knitting that. And what I'm knitting at the moment is the cowl. I wish I had it with me. It's in the other room because I'm knitting it. But I've knitted 2 of them. One was a sample to test it, one for the tutorials, and now I'm knitting another one because I like the pattern and it feels easy because I've already knitted 2. There you go. That's going to become a theme, believe me. It feels easy. You pick it up, look at it. Yeah, I know how to knit that. I know, understand it. I knitted it before. Now it's going to feel easy when I knit it a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 10th time. So knitting repeatable items, even larger items. When I was knitting cardigans for myself many moons ago, 15 years ago, not that long ago, 3 cardigans that I knitted, 2 of them were repeats. I just used a 2nd coloured yarn. I knitted one, I liked the pattern. I decided to knit a 2nd one, but just in a different colour. You will see that a lot in my wardrobe. I have 2 of these cardigans, 3 of these cardigans, they're just different colours. I buy the same t-shirt from the same shop, very similarly, if it's a colour that suits me in a different year. Just because I think, okay, that means I've got 3 different colours in my t-shirt drawer now. They make sense, they suit me, and I'm pretty much set for the next few years. I likely will not get any more of them, but I have 3 of them. They're 3 different colours. Sorted. And it makes so much sense to me to have different colours of the same item and knitting the same thing in a different colour. Knitting the same thing in a different size as well for a different person. You understand the pattern, you get the pattern, you knitted it before, you just knit it in a different colour, in a different size. There's no shame in knitting a toddler a jumper and then knitting the same one for him 3 years later in a larger size. I did that for my niece. She's 3 years old, she loved this cardigan. She was so proud of herself for doing the buttons up herself. So I had that message, so I knitted her one in a larger size for the next year. And you can bet that she was shoving herself into the smaller one as much as possible, but the bigger one just fitted her that little bit longer. Same yarn, same knitting pattern, just a different size and a different colour. Perfect. So the one thing about that, as I've already mentioned, just by the by, is that these are perfect for gifts. How many times did I get a message after this knit along 2 years ago that this pattern had been used, not just for the knit along, but twice again, 3 times again, as knitting patterns, as items for that following Christmas. Perfect. Ideal. Knitting patterns that you can knit as gifts means that the actual knitting of the gift doesn't have to be too complicated. It doesn't have to feel too much of a drain on your resources. The 4 months to Christmas can feel a bit draining because there's so much to do sometimes, depending on how much that time of year is actually a big thing in your family. I know many of you watching, it won't actually be anything that bothers you, but for some of us in the world, Christmas can drain all sorts of resources: energy, time, money, patience. But we can make it easier, less of a drain on our resources, by knitting the same thing that we've knitted before. And yeah, if you find a new pattern the next year but you knit 5 of them, all your relatives have the same thing, fine. You test a new knitting pattern in the summer, see whether it works. Or you think, hey, I remember knitting that 2 years ago. I'm going to knit that as gifts this time because I've already knitted it twice for myself. So all of those things can come into it. You're repeating the same item. You're using the same pattern. And the next thing that I'm going to mention, you know what it is, I bet. Because I do it. So many of the knitting patterns in my courses and in the Knit with Hannah store use the same yarns. I'm so sorry, there must be a road closed along here, I think, because there's traffic going past the window again and again and again and again. Okay, anyway, repeatable yarns. Why not, eh? We get used to the way that knitting the yarn is spun, the way that it's wound up, the way that we approach it on the needle as an individual stitch, the ply. We get to know the needle size, it feels comfortable in our hands when we start to knit with it again. Oh yeah, that's familiar. Okay, this is easier. The new pattern might be a bit of a challenge, but the fact that you're using familiar yarn and familiar needles makes it easier. So the yarn, definitely. You also get to know which times of year you knit with which yarns. As an example, I'm more likely to be knitting with the Rowan Felted Tweed DK actually any time of year. That doesn't bother me. But I'm more likely to be knitting with this during the winter because I am likely to save cotton knitting projects for warmer months. Just because I feel like it. Somehow, when I've got cotton out in the middle of the winter, it doesn't quite feel right. I tried it last winter and I just put the yarn down and I couldn't be bothered. It just didn't quite feel right. Unless I have a very particular purpose and I'm very motivated to knit with that yarn in the middle of winter because it's a baby blanket for a particular baby, then I'm less likely to knit with cotton in the middle of the winter. I want the cosy feel. I want the warm yarn. At that time of year, I want the thick yarn and the thick needles because that feels right at that time of year. So the familiarity can come from the time of your year that you're knitting with particular yarns, most definitely. So think about that too. And I think one of the best things is to say, actually, I'm finding familiarity in different ways, even if some of this knitting is challenging. So there's always that too. Are you knitting with a different style of needles? Are you suddenly knitting with circular needles, but you recognise the pattern because the designer you've used before, so you recognise the way it's written? Does the yarn feel very familiar because you've knitted with it a few times before? All of those things can be really helpful as you just add new things to your knitting journey and say, actually, I'm challenging parts of my knitting story, my knitting journey, but other parts still feel very familiar and comforting. Okay, one thing I would say at this point is find yourself a notebook, or like me, find yourself a shelf. And you could put a folder in your iPad, you could put a folder on your desktop, you could put a folder on your phone with your digital patterns and say, these are my familiar ones, these are the ones I want to knit again. Find a bookshelf. That's what I've got. I print off my knitting patterns. I find it so much easier to knit without the disturbance of a digital screen. Can't do that. Even a big metal thing that is supposedly a reading book, can't do it. I want a book in my hand. I just want to read a book. Away from anything digital. So I have it actually down there on paper. Obviously have folders on my computer with the digital item if necessary, and it's there for me, I know where it is. But if you look for a knitting pattern and you can't find it, but you know it's familiar and you know where it is, it might even be on the Ravelry store where you've got it. If you buy a knitting pattern from me digitally, it will be there on the website. If you log in and you've got yourself an account there, then you can go and find the download there too. So that's the point as well. The courses are separate from the knitting patterns, but they are there available to download whenever you want them if you want to. So that's an option. Have it digitally logged, have it digitally stored, but all in one place or in a few places. And have it physically stored if you have favourite knitting books, if you have favourite knitting patterns actually printed in physical form. You could write a notebook about your favourite yarns, favourite knitting patterns. Favourite yarns, you could actually keep samples of them. Favourite yarns, I always have a bag of the leftovers of my favourite yarns. Just because I know I will use them in the multiple. Like, for example, I've used leftovers to knit up this and another one. There. Here we go. It's actually sat here. That's a bag of full balls, but it looks like this. A bag of leftovers of this yarn. It's very useful to have because then you can go back to it and go, actually, I remember what yarn that is. I know which yarn it is. I've still got some of it. Leave a few of the labels in there so you know which one it is, and you can go and get it again. Also, if you want to, just as an aside, if you buy yarn online, keep all those emails from the orders in a folder in your email account, because then you'll be able to go back and just remind yourself of exactly which colour it was that you bought for a particular project. That is something I do. That is something I find really, really helpful. Just in case I've lost the ball band, I know I've got it and it's approachable and findable when I need it. Let's move on. What else do I love about repeating in knitting? I love repeatable rows. You will find different numbers of rows repeated throughout knitting patterns. Repeat these last 2 rows 20 times. Da, 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 da. These are repeating rows, and funnily enough, this is only 2 rows repeat. But we do a larger repeat with the colours. Dum, 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 dum. And it's 16 or 8 rows that are repeated with different colours, depending on which pattern you're knitting. So definitely this kind of thing is ideal when it comes to familiarity and repeating and saying, cool, I've already done that once, maybe I can do it a second time. I know I can. Look at that, I've done it 6 times. Isn't that cool? The second time, the third time, the fourth time feels easier and easier and easier and easier, and you're learning. Even though the first one may have felt like a challenge, you needed to focus that bit more. As you move forward and you move on, oh, that feels easier. Yeah, okay, I'm really enjoying this now. I'm getting a lot more joy from it. I'm feeling a lot more familiarity, a lot more warmth, a lot more cosy when I pick this up. Definitely. This is a 15-row repeat, but in smaller parts it's also a 5-row repeat. But each 5 rows is repeated with different colours all the way through. But 15 rows are the 3 colours, and then we repeat those 15 rows multiple times. And all of that comes together so easily over the cowl, and the familiarity breeds. It multiplies. That's what I love about knitting rows like this, because you do the same thing in cables, you do the same thing in lace work, In lace work especially, because lace work can be so nuanced and there be so many different variations, you actually have to spend time over the first couple of repeats actually getting to know the pattern and realising where it's repeating and where it's matching as you move through your knitting, as you're reading your knitting as you go up. I'm going to do a video about repeating your knitting in the form of reading what you're knitting as well. So do stay tuned and subscribe for that if you want to understand more about reading your knitting. But repeatable rows with lace, it can take you a bit longer, but then the ease will sit itself in and say, yeah, I know where I am, I know where I'm going. As far as repeating in cabling goes, that sits on top of each other again. And it may only be one repeat that you need to just say, actually, I know where I am now, that's easy. And it might be 6, it might be 10, it might be 20 rows of repeat for a cable, but you just move through it, and then you move through it again, and you move through it again, and then over a whole piece, maybe a blanket or a jumper, something like that, or a scarf even. I remember a long time ago knitting a scarf for my niece. It was a 12-row repeat, about 15 times. Wow, was that first 12 rows difficult. And the second 12 rows felt difficult too. But then I sat down and I realised the third and the fourth, I was knitting through those 12 rows faster. Actually, I'm looking forward to picking this up. I can do that while the dinner's in the oven. And it felt easier and easier and easier and easier. I loved it. And suddenly, by the time I reached the last row, repeat, I was going, cool, I really am proud of myself. Look how actually difficult this cable pattern was. It might have been only 12 rows, but there was a lot of complexity in it. Wow, what have I done? What have I achieved? I understand cabling more. I recognise that I'm a much better cable knitter by the end of it. And those kind of repeats are one of the big reasons why I love repeats in knitting. And I want that for you too. I do a lot of knitting patterns where there are repeats and where you get the chance to say, I'm better at it, I'm better at it, I'm better at it. Wow, look what I've done. I love that about knitting. And repeatable rows are one of those things, because once you've reached the end, then it can become something where you say, actually, do I want to repeat this pattern? Do I want to knit something similar? And then that ease starts moving into your knitting more and more. So what might feel like a challenge on the first go can feel a bit easier, and then feel a bit easier. So repeatable rows, mwah, love them. Now, repeatable stitches. This is something that is brilliant because a whole row of stitches can feel so difficult, especially if you're counting all the way along. But actually, are you counting 200 stitches? Or are you counting 20? Or 6? Or 12 stitches? What are you doing? I bet is very unlikely. Only probably if you're doing an intarsia pattern with a very complex knitting design on it, like a rose or something. It's very unlikely that each of those knitting stitches will be different. At some point it will repeat. Even a very difficult cable pattern down the back of a jumper, very likely it will be a mirror image on either side. So you kind of, oh, actually I've just done that repeat. That part of the cable is there, it's also there. I can see where it's going and it's repeating itself. So you kind of reach that second one and you go, phew. At least something feels familiar along this row. So yeah, those stitches, they're very likely very small repeats over and over and over again. And I mean, let's face it, if you're knitting a garter stitch scarf, you're knitting every stitch is a repeat of the last one. Sounds good, doesn't it? Phew, so easy. So stitches are literally repeats of the last one in some patterns. And in some patterns, you're just changing one row for the next. Knit row, purl row, knit row, purl row. So every single stitch is a repeat of the last one. And then you start the next row and every single stitch is a repeat of the last one. So yeah, there will be repeats. Some of them are much smaller than others, but repeating stitches across the row, it breeds familiarity, it breeds ease, and suddenly knitting feels cosy again. It feels warmer. And it feels motivating. You want to get back to it because you're looking forward for that relaxing, calm, beneficial time in your day. Stitch markers. And you know what I'm going to say as well? Row counters. Some of my friends who knit, they have a row counter around the neck on a string. Boom, 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 boom for every row. And it's automatic. For me, I never managed to make myself just do it every time because I didn't start knitting like that. And I never realised that row counters were much of a thing. Especially when I was young, I did have a row counter that you could stick on the end of a needle, but I found it got on the way and it was actually heavier. That needle was heavier, so it felt uncomfortable. Also, it only fitted on very small needles, so it wasn't particularly helpful. So I didn't use it. Shame, really. But you can count rows in different ways. I used to count them with a post-it note and a pencil. Yeah. That's something, if you remember from what I keep in my knitting bag, one of the things along amongst all the other tools was a pencil, and I keep one with a lid on it so that it doesn't pierce any knitting that I'm using, and a pack of post-it notes or a notebook. Keep track of your rows with a tally and a pencil on a note, on a piece of paper. That can be really helpful. And with a post-it note, you can just stick it on the pattern so you know where you are. So stitch markers mark where you are along the row, and those stitches can be counted before you even start. So it's a 5-stitch repeat. Maybe you do one every 20 stitches. If it's a 12-row repeat, you could do it every 12 or every 24 stitches. You put a stitch marker in, so it just keeps you on track so you know where you are. All of those things can be really helpful because on the knitting pattern, it is repeat this particular part 6 times, something like that. But that's why I love repeats in patterns. And the stitches, I want to approach knitting when I know there's some kind of repeat to it. If every single part of it is different, that's when I've come a cropper in the past. I have knitted intarsia patterns where it's all different. There's no familiarity other than the fact that we're doing knit stitch and purl stitch. Using a U-yarn, using new stitches, needles, and following a brand new pattern that someone else has written. That was not an easy time for me. Yeah, never mind, eh? Okay, now, there is one more thing I will mention, because repeats can go much larger than the individual items. Yes, I love knitting the same thing over and over again, and I'm likely to knit this newer cowl as well that we're doing in the knit-along. Do join the knit-along, by the way, if you're watching this in August or September 2024, because it's open and we start on the 9th of September. And after then, I will put the knitting pattern available. I'll put the rainbow cowl links in as well in the description, so you'll be able to find them too. I also love the bigger part of knitting in that you use the same designer. You kind of knit with the same annual routine, as an example. And as an example, I love our knit-alongs in the autumn of every year. It's become a routine for us. It's become something that we just do. So as a team, as a group, as a community, we knit the same item together. So that's something very definitely that I love about knitting, is that we all come together and we support each other. And that community feels repetitive in a good way. It feels familiar. It feels comforting. Okay, I'm not the only one knitting this. They're knitting it too. It feels a lot easier because I have that support around me. Also, as a knitter, I don't know about you, but I tend to go to the same people if I'm finding a stitch a bit complicated and I don't understand it. I will go to the same teacher to try and understand it. And that's like a lot of life. I will go to the same YouTube channels to look up lots of different things. Because I recognise that they are better at it than other people and I understand them better than other people. We just draw to different teachers because it's the way that we learn. So you might be drawn to me because you learn in the way that I teach. You might be drawn to other teachers for different parts of your life because they teach in a way that suits you for that part of your life. And you may be drawn to 2 or 3 different knitting teachers for different parts of your knitting. All of those different things can come together and the community supports each other. It breeds familiarity and it breeds repetition. It can be really helpful as we just move through the knitting journey, we move through life. Yes, we are willing to make changes. We're looking for interest and diversity in our lives. But we're also, for the survival instinct, looking for familiarity. We don't move houses every 3 weeks. Very few people do. My brother has trekked across all sorts of parts of the world. He's moved around in youth hostels and all sorts. He's the same age as me, pretty much. But he's still doing that, and that's still part of his life. But that feels familiar to him. He goes to different parts of the world because he's been there before, and it feels familiar. He speaks the same languages as wherever he is because it feels familiar. It's not because to him it feels stressful. If I was to go out there and suddenly start trekking all over the world and living out of a backpack and not having the same roof over my head where I could wake up in the same bed every day, it might feel quite stressful. I think it probably would feel quite stressful, but for him it's familiar. Very few of us move house every day, every 3 weeks. Very few of us move country every few weeks. But it's the familiarity in life that helps us. It's the repeatability of life that really helps us. If you would like familiarity in your knitting, then look for all of those things. Patterns, yarns, rows, stitches. And I love repeatable knitting for all of those reasons. Not only that, I love repeatable knitting for the times of year I knit things and for the community with which I knit, yes. And do join us in the knitting community. You can either do that with the knit along, which is starting in September 9th, we start knitting. And you can join us for that. We are knitting this cowl together for 3 weeks over 4 weekends. Brilliant. I'd love to see you in there. I will drop the video which gives you all of the details about this knit along. If you just haven't quite caught up yet, catch up with this one. It's definitely a knit to watch. It's definitely a knit to start. If you've never done colour work before, it's a great one to start with for many of the reasons that I go into in those videos about the knit along. So do go and watch them if you would like some more information. It's easy to join wherever you are in the world. Join with the digital access. If you're in the UK, there may be a couple of kits left. I'm not sure. If there are any kits left, I'm only sending them to the UK because of the weird postal issues that obviously have been going on over the last few years. You can easily source your own yarn, and I will be sending out another email with all of that information in this week if you join the knit along this week. If you would also like to join the community and the knit along has been and gone, then we have the YouTube membership for the Knit with Hannah channel, and that means that you join us, you get 2 extra videos each month, you get extra chats in the conversation part of YouTube, the posts basically, so you'll see extra things popping up on your YouTube feed. So come and join the membership for that, definitely. You also, if you want to join now, you will see the discount available for the knit along. That's still applicable if you want to use that. You can still get 10% off with the membership code. So go in there and you just need to join at the 2nd or 3rd tier and you will get a discount with this and many of the other things that will be coming up over time as well. Okay, so the repeats of knitting. I would love to see you inside the knit along. I'd love to see you inside the membership. Do come and join us, and I will see you again soon for another video. Bye for now. Thanks so much for joining me today. happy knitting.